Bill Vantuano is with me today from Railway Age magazine. He has been there since 1992. And of course, like many magazines, they have changed over the years. He has added coverage of technological revolutions within rail, as well as a lot of other things. He was given to me as a source by the folks at CSX because we had a lot of questions about what happened at East Palestine. Bill, thank you so much for being with me today.
My pleasure, Martha. I've been listening to your program in preparation, and I have to say you're very balanced, and it's something that as a fellow journalist I really appreciate. But I'm here to help. I'm here to provide as much information as I can.
Thank you very much. Listen, first of all, a lot of people, and the number one question I've been getting from my listeners over the last 3 weeks is, how does a train derail? And I know that seems like a simple question, but how does a train derail, or do we know how this train derailed?
Well, derailment can occur from a defect in the track or a defect on the vehicle, on the rail car. For example, a broken wheel, an overheated roller bearing, broken axle, okay? This particular derailment, as the NTSB accurately reported yesterday in its preliminary report, was a bearing, a roller bearing on one of the cars. I think it was the 23rd car in the consist, overheated and caused an axle failure. That caused the derailment. That's the simple explanation. Very basic.
So about 4 or 5 days into this, I got a call from a listener saying, "Have you heard anything about this train derailment?" And quite frankly, I really hadn't. And I stay pretty much on top of things, but I think there was a little bit of a slow to response for a number of reasons. It might have been the location. It might have been, who knows what it is. A lot of times if things are outside of major TV markets, they're slow to get coverage, and maybe that was part of it. But I watched with interest the next day when Governor DeWine had his first press conference, and it was a very long one. It was a couple hours long, and he was explaining the idea of how they were going to get rid of the hazardous materials, and they had a choice between two bad choices. And then he said something about that they weren't notified that there were hazardous materials, and that there was some kind of criteria of how much hazardous materials had to be on trains in order for it to be notified. Can you kind of explain that, how that works? How is it that trains have to notify if they have hazardous material and they're traveling through someone's town?
Well, you have to understand that railroads are federally regulated. As far as I know, there is no requirement to notify a locality or a municipality of what exactly is on the train, and there are various reasons for that, security reasons, so on and so forth. But that said, again, the industry is federally regulated. Okay, every type of car that carries any type of lading, whether it's hazardous or non-hazardous, is clearly identified. It's clearly regulated. For example, any tank car that's carrying hazmat has to be plaque carded. Okay, there's like a sign. In simple terms, there's a sign that looks like a triangle or something like that shows
like the old nuclear,
exactly.
nuclear fallout shelter signals.
Right. Exactly. And there are various classes of hazardous materials. There's 3 packing groups: packing group 1, packing group 2, packing group 3, and in addition to that, there's classifications for what's called an HAFT, a high hazard. So many acronyms, geez. A high hazard flammable train that is really for crude oil and ethanol. Okay, so that's a basic explanation. But the railroads know exactly what's on those cars. Anyway, your next question.
So, Norfolk Southern was the railroad in this case. And it looks to me, and I've read a number of reports, so I may have this a little bit off, but it was something like 10 cars had hazardous material, and there was something like 141 cars in this particular train. And look, we live in an area, we have a inland port not too far up the road from us here that comes from the Savannah port, and rail brings stuff to this inland port. There's another one over in Chatsworth, which is in about an hour and a half from here. And because of rail connections, our Savannah port can get goods from the port to 80% of the population of the United States within 3 days, So,
Right.
so we've got great opportunities, and rail is really important, moving goods from one place to another. But is Norfolk Southern going to have the resources to be able to do what they're going to have to do to clean this up? Because I think this is going to be short-term and long-term, and it could be very long-term if it turns out there are health things that relate to this because of the way they disposed of the materials.
Well, I would say Norfolk Southern does, and just going directly to their CEO, Alan Shaw. Alan has been a career railroader at Norfolk Southern for 27, 28 years. I know him. I don't know him as well as some of the other CEOs I know in the industry, because he's relatively new at the CEO post. Okay. But he's been a part of this railroad for 27 years, and I can tell you he's a man of his word. The CEO sets the tone, and if he says that we're going to do what it takes and we're going to do what's right, I would take him at his word. There's a lot, there's a lot of things in play here, and I was listening to you before. I have my sound off, of course. I don't want any feedback. You don't want any feedback.
That's right.
Listening to what you were saying about differences in political responses. This whole thing has been politicized.
Yes.
And
it shouldn't be.
That's it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It's about safety. It's about technology. It's about emergency response. There's a lot of things involved, but politics, it's being badly twisted, and there's a lot of misinformation out there, unfortunately.
Well, and it shouldn't be. I did a thing yesterday. It was a webinar with a pastor, Gary Mason, and Dr. Rashad Ritchie, and I was doing it in my collaboration I do with the Carter Center, because for some reason, I'm kind of some unusual thing being a conservative for them, but they decided a couple of years ago they needed to have some conservatives on their staff too at the Carter Center, that they were perceived too far as being a liberal organization. And so I've been helping them kind of understand how to communicate in a cross-partisan way is what it's called. And so we had this really kind of how can faith-based people help with this kind of political divide, but really it can work with any of us, okay? Because we all, this should show us, we all want clean water, we all want clean air, we all want a place to work, live, and play near our homes. Most people don't want to move across country for a better job. Some people will. And so that's why you see this kind of thing. And I think there are such challenges because we have politicized everything right now. I mean, you even had Joy Behar yesterday on The View say that these, you got what you deserved because you voted for Donald Trump. I mean, come on. That is the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard.
It is. And by the way, as far as, when you say the Carter Center, you mean for the Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter
right?
Center, yes.
It was Jimmy Carter who in 1980, he was the president who signed the Staggers Rail Act, which largely deregulated the rail industry into law. Okay, it was it was a Democrat, Jim Florio.
Right. Okay, I know
Congressman
who he is.
from Camden, New Jersey. Okay, who was the architect of the Staggers Act, even though it was the name Harley Staggers' name out of deference was put on the bill, but it was Jimmy Carter who deregulated the railroads. Anyway.
Well, you and I talked a little bit when we talked on the phone about passenger rail. It's something that,
yes.
is something I think about a lot. I mean, we have a very limited metro system in Atlanta. I wish we had a better one. But it is a great way. I live an hour north of Atlanta. I can drive into the farthest north train station. I can take the train all the way to the airport, and I love it. It's great because they're always doing construction at the airport. That way you don't have to park, and it's fantastic. But there was a time when you could take a train from Atlanta to Gainesville, from Atlanta to Athens, from Atlanta to Savannah or Macon or whatever. And you can't do that because they're doing freight everywhere. I don't see that changing. Do you?
Well, it could change, and it has been changing. You have to go back to the late 1960s. Actually, even before that, when the freight railroads were providing passenger service at a tremendous cost, a tremendous loss, a financial loss, and and one reason why they were losing so much money was on providing passenger services is because the government came in back in the 50s and subsidized the construction of the highway system, and also subsidized the airports, and they're still paying for for the air traffic control system. So passengers moved from trains to, and also private automobiles. They moved from trains to private automobiles and airplanes. So Amtrak was created in 1971 not to preserve passenger service, but to take the financial burden of providing passenger service off the backs of the freight railroads. Now, in that time, there's been a lot of progress. There are efforts to improve passenger service in various markets. I know there's been an ongoing effort in Atlanta, in the Atlanta region, for a long time. What a lot of people don't understand is that any passenger service, okay, and I'm not talking transit like MARTA or streetcars or usually, I'm talking about commuter rail, longer distance regional services, mainline services. The freight railroads own the infrastructure, okay? They are more than willing to work with the passenger operators to host the trains, but the caveat is that any passenger service cannot impede upon the viability of the freight rail service. And they're absolutely correct in that. And we have examples all over the country of railroads and passenger operators working together to get passenger service on the rails.
We are talking to Bill Vantuano, and am I saying that right, Bill? It's okay?
Yes.
Vantuano, good. And one final question. We got about a minute to go. What has to happen next in East Palestine?
Well, the NTSB has to complete its investigation, okay? The official report, these reports take sometimes a year or more. But I would say that the preliminary report is, which was issued yesterday, is quite accurate. It sets the basic facts, okay?
And does that make Norfolk Southern responsible for the overheated bearing, or who's responsible for that?
Well, you have to understand how railroads operate. Railroads do not own most of their freight cars. Okay, they're owned by the customers, or leased by the customers from the car owners that buy the rail cars and the components from the car builders. So it has to be determined. There are various parties.
So there's more to be determined.
There's more to be determined.
Absolutely.
When did the defect start? It could have started hundreds of miles away, and it was too tiny to pick up. It's an unfortunate set of circumstances that the failure came just before or immediately after the final hot box detector before the derailment picked up the temperature, and the train crew responded immediately. Okay, so the train crew was doing its job. Okay, it's just an unfortunate set of circumstances, but on balance, I would say that the response to the derailment, the emergency response, NTSB, EPA, they did rapidly everything they could possibly do. And the presence of a politician, whether it's the Secretary of Transportation or the President of the United States, would have no bearing on the speed and professionalism of the response.
Bill
I'll
Vantuano
conclude with that.
From Railway Age, thank you so much for being with me today. We'll talk again.
Okay,
thank you.